The night he broke through to godhood, the woman he loved drove a dagger through his heart, and the sworn brother he'd bled for just watched him die. Shuyan Guk, Mao Hoa on Dan Ton, but the sword god didn't cross over. He woke 60 years in the past, a crippled boy the whole sect spat on, remembering every betrayal that hadn't happened yet, and exactly where each of their fortunes was buried. Pain. That was the first thing he felt, and the first proof. 60 years of mastery, gone from his body. But not from his mind. Every technique, every enemy's weakness, every buried fortune, intact. He'd been here before. He knew every step of the road ahead. And this time, he wouldn't walk it blind. The outer courtyard hadn't changed. Same cracked stones. Same sneers. Last life, he'd lain here for 3 years, swallowing insults, waiting to die in a body with shattered meridians and a ruined core. 3 years of crawling. But the sword god remembered something this broken boy never could: the meridians weren't destroyed. They were sealed. And whoever sealed them had used a technique he'd only recognized decades later, a technique that proved someone had targeted him long before Su Wan ever picked up a blade. A bowl of rice, placed quietly beside him. Ah, xian, orphan girl, outer court, no name, no backing. Last life, Lin Xiao never looked at her twice. She died in a sect purge 3 years later, and he didn't even learn her name until decades after. This time, he caught her wrist. The bruises. She pulled away, embarrassed. But his eyes weren't on the bruises, they were on the shape of them. He'd seen that grip pattern before. Someone in the inner sect was already hurting her. And last life, he'd walked right past it. He looked at the calendar stone and his blood went cold. Tomorrow was the Azure Cloud Pill gathering. Last life, Fong Lai found a broken manual at that gathering, stolen it, actually, and rode that single thread of luck all the way to the inner sect. These people laughing at him right now? They had no idea. The crippled boy in front of them had already buried every single one of them, once. And he remembered where. While the cousin disciple laughed, Lin Xiao was somewhere else entirely, 60 years ahead, pulling memories like files from a shelf. The black iron sword. Buried in a rock crevice behind the rear peak, waiting to be unearthed tonight. Last life, he never knew it existed. Fong Lai found it, hid it, and built his entire foundation on a sword that was never his. The sword contained a fragment of the Xiantai sword cannon, pages so valuable that the inner sect would kill for a single glance. And right now, it was just sitting in the dirt. Waiting. The enforcement elder passed through, and the cousin disciple's face shifted like a mask. Suddenly he was the victim. He stole my chi gathering pill. Same accusation. Same timing. Same fabricated tears. Last life, Lin Xiao had stammered, pleaded, been beaten unconscious, and the pill was never found. Because there was nothing to find, the cousin disciple had already sold it. But this time, Lin Xiao didn't stammer. He didn't plead. He simply stood up. And the whole courtyard went quiet, because the crippled boy had never stood up for himself before. Not once. Lin Xiao looked at the cousin disciple the way a man looks at something he's already buried. Then he spoke, calm, unhurried, precise. Check the lining of his right sleeve, elder. Second fold. He always uses the second fold. The enforcement elder paused. Reached in. Found it. The cousin disciple's face went white, because no outsider could have known that. Lin Xiao had never once interacted with him before today. And yet he spoke about that man's hiding habits like he'd watched him for a lifetime. Because he had. The crowd dispersed in murmurs. The cousin disciple was dragged away for punishment. The enforcement elder gave Lin Xiao a long, unreadable look before walking on. But Lin Xiao wasn't basking in the victory. His eyes were already on the rear mountain. The gathering tonight. Fong Lai would arrive at the hour of the rat, 3 hours from now, to steal a fortune that would define the next 60 years of his life. Last time, there was no one standing in his way. This time, there was. A crippled boy with shattered meridians and 60 years of memory. And the first thing he was going to steal back was a sword. The night patrol followed the same route they'd followed for 300 years. Lin Xiao knew the blind spot between the second and third bell, a 12-breath window where no eyes watched this path. He'd walked it 10,000 times in a future that no longer existed. Every step, every shadow, every loose stone underfoot, etched into memory by 60 years of living what hadn't happened yet. The outer disciples guarding this ridge? He'd trained half of their grandmasters. He knew their shifts better than they did. Now the thing he came for was 3 feet under the old cedar root, exactly where he'd watched Fong Lai dig it up 60 years from now. Same tree. Same dirt. Same treasure. Different hands. Last time, it built a trader's empire. This time, it would dismantle one. Halfway to the cedar, he stopped. A patch of gray moss between 2 rocks, completely ordinary unless you knew what it hid. Last time, 3 outer disciples had stepped on this exact spot during the pill gathering. The formation woven into the soil had liquefied their meridians in 4 seconds. Lin Xiao had found their bodies 3 days later, faces frozen mid-scream. The sect called it an accident. He stepped around it without slowing down. Every 10 paces, another death he remembered. A root that concealed a dark trap. A stream that was actually a mild neurotoxin when absorbed through the skin. 60 years of corpses, mapped in his skull like a graveyard blueprint. He walked through it all untouched, a ghost navigating his own cemetery. If the sect knew what slept under this mountain, they'd have sealed it centuries ago. 3 feet down. His fingers hit cold iron, black as the pit it slept in, crude, unshaped, barely recognizable as a blade. Beside it, wrapped in oilcloth that had already rotted to lace, a fragment of a manual. The broken residue art. In his first life, Fong Lai had unearthed this exact bundle at the Azure Cloud Pill Gathering, 1 day from now, and hidden it for decades, building his entire reputation on a stolen stroke of luck that the sect never traced back. Nobody ever knew where Fong Lai's genius came from. Now Lin Xiao understood why. It was never genius. It was theft. The iron hummed against his palm, faint, barely alive. Like something sleeping that recognized the hand waking it. Footsteps. Too many, too close. Lin Xiao's hand closed over the sword embryo and manual, pressing both flat against his ribs under the robe. 3 shapes emerged from the tree line. The cousin disciple and 2 of his loyal dogs, outer court trash who did his dirty work for scraps. Last time, this ambush had happened tomorrow night, at the pill gathering, in front of a crowd. A public humiliation. A stolen treasure in broad daylight while elders watched and did nothing. But tonight they'd come early. Hungry. Greedy. Impatient. Good. Lin Xiao let his shoulders slump, let his eyes go dull, let the cripple's mask settle back over his face like an old glove. They were smiling. 3 against 1, and the one was a broken meridian waist. What could go wrong? They had no idea the waist remembered every fist they'd ever thrown, and exactly where to put the knife. The cousin disciple shoved him. Hard. Lin Xiao stumbled, not faked. His body really was that weak. 1 kick to the ribs. Then another. The 2 lackeys laughed. Lin Xiao spat dirt and said nothing. Last time, he'd begged. He'd cried. He'd promised to hand over anything he found, anything he owned, anything he was. The memory tasted like ash. What was a cousin's kick compared to a wife's blade through your heart? What was a broken rib compared to 60 years of betrayal? Nothing. Less than nothing. He stayed down, let them puff up, let them feel strong. The residue art's first form didn't need spiritual power. A cripple with ruined meridians could perform it, if the angle was perfect and the target was close enough to touch. And right now, the cousin disciple was standing exactly 1 arm's length away, chin exposed, grinning like a winner. He moved. 1 breath. The residue art's opening form, a finger strike to the collaterals beneath the left arm. No spiritual energy. No force. Pure geometry, applied to the exact node that dropped blood from the brain. The cousin disciple's eyes went wide. His mouth opened. No sound came out. He folded like a puppet with cut strings. The 2 lackeys had half a second to be confused, then Lin Xiao's palm found the second acupoint, then the third. 2 bodies hit dirt. 3 seconds. 3 men down. Total silence. Lin Xiao straightened his robe, rolled his neck, wiped the mud off his hands. 60 years he had drilled this single movement into his bones until it was as natural as blinking. The sword god's first lesson: one perfect strike beats 100 sloppy ones. One by one, Lin Xiao dragged the bodies into a crevice between two boulders. He propped them upright, tilted their chins to their chests, sleeping disciples caught napping on patrol. By morning, the acupoint seal would dissolve naturally. They'd wake up groggy, weak for a day, no bruising, no evidence. Nothing to report. Even if they talked, who'd believe 3 cultivators were dropped by a cripple's single touch? The story would die before it started. He knew this ridge wouldn't be patrolled again until dawn bell. He'd scheduled those patrols himself, in another life. The corrupt elder backing his dear cousin would smell something off, though. He'd come looking. And Lin Xiao would be ready, but not tonight. Tonight, he had a broken meridian to unbreak. He sat cross-legged beneath the cedar, the iron sword across his knees, the broken manual open in his lap. The residue art described a circulation path that standard cultivation called impossible, forcing qi through collapsed meridians by reverse-flowing the body's own dying breath. Last time, Fong Lai had needed 3 months to open the first layer. Fong Lai was talented. Lin Xiao was not in this body. But Lin Xiao had something Fong Lai never did: 60 years of understanding exactly what the art was, what it could become, where every strand of qi needed to go. He breathed in. Something cracked deep in his chest, not bone, not pain, but a door that had been bricked shut for 16 years suddenly splitting its mortar. Qi moved. Thin. Frail. Like a thread of smoke in a frozen corridor. But it moved. His lips parted. He exhaled. 1 layer. Just one. But after 60 years of nothing, of being a god severed from his own power, 1 layer of qi in a cripple's body felt like surfacing from a drowning. His hands were shaking. Not from weakness. From something he refused to name. Then his fingers brushed something else in the dirt. Small. Cold. Wrapped in faded silk. A jade fragment, pale green, cracked down the middle, carved with a half-lotus. He knew it. He'd know it in any life, in any darkness, in any century. It was hers. Su Wan's. From the year she was 15. From before she was his wife. From before she was his killer. She'd lost it here, in this garden of dirt, and never found it again. In his first life, he'd given her a new one, a whole one, unbroken, as a wedding gift. She'd worn it the day she stabbed him through the heart. He pocketed the fragment without a word. Some things you keep. Even when you know exactly how they end. There was a grave on the eastern slope of the sect, unmarked, overgrown, forgotten. He'd found it 60 years too late. A servant girl buried in a shallow pit because nobody considered her worth a proper funeral. He'd been the sword god by then. He could split mountains. He could cut rivers in half. And he could not remember the last thing he'd said to her before she died. That was the weight he carried into his second life, not the betrayal, not the sword wound. Her name, and the fact that he'd never said it when it mattered. The outer court woke to grey mist and the smell of congee. Lin Xiao sat against the wall of the storage shed, the place where crippled disciples were told to sleep when the bunks filled up. He'd chosen it on purpose. He knew nobody would come looking for him here. But somebody did. Every morning, before the first bell, the same light footsteps on the stone path. The same careful voice calling his name through the mist. In his first life, he'd thought it was pity. He'd pushed her away, told her not to waste her time on a cripple. He wouldn't make that mistake twice. Half a bowl. Her half. She'd done this every day for 2 months, skipped her own meal, wrapped it in lotus leaf, carried it across the outer court before anyone could catch her sharing with the sect's worst disciple. He took the bowl. The rice was cold. It didn't matter. Last time, he'd eaten in silence and sent her away. He remembered the exact words, asterisk, you don't need to come back. Asterisk she hadn't. 3 weeks later, she was dead. He looked at her now, 14, skinny, bright-eyed, alive, and made a different choice. The outer court steward was a small man with small habits, skimming spirit stones from the supply count, selling safe assignments to disciples whose families could pay. A clean, quiet racket that had worked for years. Nobody complained because the people he hurt couldn't complain. Servants. Orphans. Names that didn't appear on the enrollment ledger. Lin Xiao had watched this man for 3 days and confirmed what he already knew: the schedule was being altered. Tags swapped. Certain names sent to certain places. Places where people didn't come back. The conversation lasted 40 seconds. That was all Lin Xiao needed. The buyer's name, the price, the swapped tags, the patrol route, every detail matched the timeline burned into his memory from 60 years of regret. But here was the question that made his blood run cold: was the steward acting alone, or had someone higher up arranged for a particular servant girl to die in a particular place at a particular time? He didn't know yet. Not for certain. But he knew someone who could find out, the enforcement elder. And he knew exactly what bait would force that old man's attention. The third night watch. That was when it happened last time: the scream nobody answered, the body nobody found for 3 full days. Less than 4 hours from now, unless he changed the math. He adjusted their route without explanation, cutting through the northern service path instead of the main trail, skirting the ridge where the patrol route overlapped with the beast den. Xian followed. She always followed him. That blind, trusting faith had gotten her killed before, not because she was weak, but because the person she trusted hadn't been strong enough to deserve it. The silence was wrong. No insects, no wind rustle, no ambient spirit bird calls. Every living thing within 100 paces had gone still. He'd felt this silence before, standing in this exact spot, 60 years ago, one day too late. The cub nested in the blind corner where the stone wall cracked, a natural funnel that amplified sound and trapped scent. Any cultivator with a working spirit core would have sensed the beast's killing intent from the entrance. Lin Xiao couldn't. His meridians were sealed shut. But he didn't need qi. He needed geometry, biology, and one angle that the sword god had perfected across 6 decades of killing things far worse than this. The beast came fast and low, exactly the strike pattern he remembered. A young ridge lizard, scales not yet hardened, attacking from the left side funnel where the echo made its charge sound like it was coming from 3 directions at once. Any outer court disciple would have panicked, swung wide, wasted energy on the armored flank. Lin Xiao stepped inside the charge. One thrust, upward, at the soft node behind the jaw where the skull plates hadn't fused. The residue art's first form didn't need power. It needed precision. The beast's legs buckled. It hit the stone, twitched twice, and stopped breathing. The whole fight had lasted less than 2 seconds. The discipline hall was nearly empty at this hour. Lin Xiao walked in carrying 3 things: the steward's forged assignment tag, the swapped patrol roster with the buyer's name still on it, and a scales sample from the beast that proved it had been nesting in that location for weeks, long enough for the steward to know exactly what he was sending a servant girl into. He placed all 3 on the enforcement elder's desk without ceremony. The steward, dragged in by 2 hall guards, turned the color of old ash. The enforcement elder examined the evidence. Then he examined the boy who'd brought it, a crippled outer court disciple with no cultivation, no backing, and no reason to know any of this. The sect auction ran the same lots every cycle, same pills, same weapons, same curiosities. He remembered every price, every fake, every hidden treasure the auctioneer didn't know he was selling. First he needed silver. So he sold an unmarked shard he'd picked up at the back hill, a piece every appraiser dismissed as junk. It sold for 12 times what he expected, because 60 years from now, somebody would discover what it actually was. The auction hall was packed, outer disciples, inner disciples, even a few elders in the upper gallery. Lin Xiao sat in the far corner where the lamplight didn't reach. He didn't need to see the stage. He already knew every lot on that board. Lot 12 was a real spirit-condensing pill, decent, overpriced. Lot 19 was a weapon with a cracked core that would shatter within a month. Lot 22, that one was interesting. But Lot 37. That was the only one that mattered. Because in his old life, nobody had bid on it. Nobody had even looked at it. And the man who eventually found it became a legend. Lot 37 came up and the hall laughed. A worn scroll, no spiritual signature, classified as residue waste. The cousin disciple bid against him purely to humiliate, trash buying trash. Fong Lai smirked from across the hall, already climbing in the sect's eyes, already wearing stolen confidence. Lin Xiao let them laugh. He placed one bid. When the cousin pushed, he walked away. Nobody else bid on garbage. And that was exactly what he wanted. Let them think they'd won. Let them think he was broke, humiliated, finished. 60 years of memory told him something different. The real treasure was always hidden where everyone else stopped looking. The laughter followed him out of the hall. He let it. The cousin disciple thought he'd won. Fong Lai thought Lin Xiao was still the same cripple he'd always kicked around. They didn't know. They couldn't know. 60 years from now, Fong Lai would stand over Lin Xiao's dying body and smile, exactly that same smile. The cousin would be there too, a lapdog fetching scraps from Su Wan's table. Every face in that auction hall had a future, and Lin Xiao had watched them all play out. So let them laugh now. The dead always smile widest before the blade falls. The whole hall called it scrap. 60 years later, that same scrap would sire a sword sovereign. Lin Xiao peeled the waste film off the scroll's surface, and the real text bled through, line by line. A top-tier cultivation manual, hidden under a layer of residue ink that faded in lamplight. The technique was called the void-breaking formula. In his old life, he'd found it by accident, decades too late, after he'd already built his foundation wrong. This time, he held it in his hands at 16. Every cultivator in that hall had touched this scroll and tossed it aside. Every single one of them had held a sovereign's inheritance and called it garbage. And Lin Xiao had bought it for pocket change. Lin Xiao walked back into the hall. Every eye turned, the cripple who'd bought garbage, returning for more. But he wasn't looking at the stage. He was looking at lot 22, sitting in the enforcement elder's hand. The elder was turning it over, considering a purchase. Lin Xiao raised his hand and spoke, clearly, calmly, lot 22 was a forgery. The fracture pattern on the pill's surface was wrong. He'd seen this exact fake before. He died because of it. The elder broke the pill. Gray powder, not gold. The hall went silent. The enforcement elder looked at the outer disciple who just saved his face and his spirit stones, and asked one question, "Who are you?" Lin Xiao didn't answer. He didn't need to. He just needed the debt. Across the hall, Su Wan watched him. She'd been watching since he walked back in, this outer disciple nobody noticed, who'd just done something no outer disciple should do. Her eyes were narrow, calculating, the same eyes that, 60 years from now, would watch him die without blinking. But not yet. Right now she was still talented, still beautiful, still the sect's rising star who hadn't chosen her side. Lin Xiao felt her gaze like a blade pressed against his neck, familiar, intimate, lethal. He met her eyes for one heartbeat, then looked away. Let her wonder. Let her be curious. Curiosity was the first thread of every trap she'd ever set, and this time, he was the one holding the rope. After the auction, Lin Xiao found the seller of lot 37, a masked wanderer, no sect badge, no name. But Lin Xiao had seen that gate before, heard that voice before. In his old life, this man had given him one sentence, a single line of advice that had saved his life in the sword tomb. 3 months later, the man was found dead in a ravine. No witnesses. No investigation. Just another nameless corpse in a world that didn't care. He wasn't nameless this time. Not to Lin Xiao. The wanderer had 3 months to live, maybe less. Someone wanted him dead, and in the old timeline, no one had cared enough to ask why. This time, someone was asking. Lin Xiao didn't follow the wanderer. He followed the silence around him, the gaps in the crowd where people should have been, the watchers who weren't watching the auction. In his old life, he'd assumed the wanderer's death was random, a rogue cultivator robbed in the wild. But the sword god had been a fool at 16. He'd seen the patterns and missed them. The corrupt elder wanted this man dead. That meant the wanderer had something, or knew something, worth killing for. Lin Xiao couldn't save him with strength. Not yet. But he could do something the sword god had never done at this age, he could wait. Let the killers come. Let them show their hand. Then take the whole arm. The night before his trial, Lin Xiao sat cross-legged on a cold stone floor, a short blade resting across his knees. He wasn't sharpening it for combat. He was sharpening his memory. In his past life, this exact night had been the last time he ever slept peacefully. Tomorrow, Fong Lai would stand before the elders and call him a thief. The sect would believe every word. His cultivation veins would be shattered, not in battle, but in a courtroom, surrounded by people he trusted since childhood. He remembered the sounds. The crack of his own meridians. The silence from the spectators. The faint smell of sandalwood from the elder's robe as the sentence was handed down. He'd replayed that day for 60 years, turning it over like a blade in his mind, examining every crack in the frame they'd built around him. And now, 24 hours before it was supposed to happen again, he had found every single crack, and sealed them shut. He arrived at the discipline hall an hour early. Not because he was eager. Because he needed to see the room before it filled with people who wanted him destroyed. The hall was built from dark ironwood, high ceiling, narrow windows, a single raised platform where the enforcement elder would sit. In his past life, Lin Xiao had stood at the center of that platform like a lamb at slaughter, too stunned to speak while Fong Lai's lies piled higher and higher around him. He remembered where every person had stood. The corrupt elder, third seat on the left, behind a carved screen, always hiding, always pulling strings. The three witnesses Fong Lai had bought, standing in a tight cluster near the east pillar. And one seat he'd never noticed last time, reserved at the far end of the hall, for a spectator whose name he hadn't learned until decades later, when it was already too late. Today, Lin Xiao noted every exit, every shadow, every face that would soon fill this room. And he smiled, because this time, the trap had teeth. Fong Lai played the same note he always played, the concerned brother, the loyal disciple, the heartbroken friend forced to do the right thing. He walked into the discipline hall with slow, heavy steps, eyes red as if he'd been crying all night. And maybe he had. Not from guilt, from the effort of holding back a smile. Lin Xiao stole the secret manual, he told the elders, voice cracking at exactly the right moments. I saw him with my own eyes. The manual, he hid it under his bed. In his past life, the performance had been flawless. The sect believed every word. They shattered Lin Xiao's cultivation veins right here, in this hall, while Fong Lai watched with his head bowed and his fists clenched, hiding the relief flooding through his veins. The act was perfect. It had fooled everyone. But this time, Lin Xiao had walked into that hall carrying the very evidence that would bury his attackers. And sitting among the spectators, watching it all unfold with quiet curiosity, was a face he could never forget. While Fong Lai spoke, Lin Xiao's gaze drifted, not to the accused platform where he was meant to stand, but to a carved wooden screen on the left side of the hall. Behind it, partially hidden in shadow, sat the corrupt elder. In his past life, Lin Xiao hadn't even known the man was there. He'd been too terrified, too confused, too busy begging for a fairness that never came. It took him 40 years to trace the bribe money back to that screen, 40 years to learn that the verdict hadn't been Fong Lai's at all. Fong Lai was the blade. This elder was the hand that swung it. Right now, behind that carved screen, the old man was smiling. A thin, dry smile, barely visible in the gaps between the wood. He thought the trap had already closed. He thought tonight he'd be counting spirit stones in private, reward for a clean kill. Lin Xiao remembered the smile. He'd carved it into his memory the day he'd learned the truth, a memory so vivid it burned. The old man thought he was the hunter. He had no idea he was standing in the exact center of a trap Lin Xiao had spent weeks building, specifically for him. When the enforcement elder called him forward, every eye in the hall locked onto him. They expected a trembling boy. A desperate denial. Tears, perhaps, or the hollow silence of someone who knew they were caught. What they got was something none of them were prepared for. Lin Xiao walked to the center of the platform slowly, hands at his sides, spine straight. He didn't look at the floor. He didn't look at Fong Lai. He looked at the audience, row by row, face by face, as if he were memorizing every single one of them. In his past life, he'd stood in this exact spot shaking so hard his teeth chattered. He remembered the shame. The suffocating heat in his chest. The feeling of the world collapsing inward as every friendly face turned away. He remembered all of it. That was why, this time, there was nothing left to fear. The worst thing that could happen to a man had already happened to him, and he'd survived it, climbed to godhood, and come back to settle the debt. Fong Lai's confident smirk faltered, just slightly. Something about the boy's calm didn't fit the plan. And for the first time in this entire scheme, a flicker of doubt crossed the perfect architecture of Fong Lai's lies. Lin Xiao didn't argue. He didn't beg. He didn't deny a single word. He simply reached into his robe, slowly, deliberately, and produced a small cloth, stained with dark ink, wrapped around a shard of broken lock from the manual cabinet. He held it up so the enforcement elder could see. Then he spoke 4 words that turned the entire hall upside down: check his right hand. The cloth bore fingerprints. The fingerprints matched the ink stain still drying on Fong Lai's right thumb, residue from the very night he'd broken into the cabinet himself, planting evidence to frame the boy he called brother. The hall went dead silent. Fong Lai's face drained of all color, then flushed crimson, then went pale again, a rapid, ugly cycle of panic. Behind the carved screen, the corrupt elder shifted so hard his chair scraped against the floor. Lin Xiao remembered this frame perfectly. He'd spent 60 years as a god replaying the moment his life was stolen, examining it from every angle, memorizing every detail, understanding exactly how the blade had entered his back and whose hand had held it. Now he was the one holding the blade. Fong Lai and his 3 companions were dragged forward and charged with false accusation. The punishment was absolute: 50 lash strikes each, and expulsion from the inner courtyard. The confident, heartbroken brother collapsed in real time. Fong Lai fell to his knees so hard the sound echoed off the ironwood walls. His mouth opened, closed, opened again, but no words came. The rehearsed performance, the careful timing, the 3 witnesses he'd lined up near the east pillar, all of it evaporated in the span of 4 words. He looked toward the carved screen, searching for guidance from the man who'd promised him this was foolproof. But the seat behind the screen was empty. The corrupt elder was already gone, slipped out through a side passage the moment the cloth appeared, sandals striking stone in a rapid, uneven rhythm that echoed through the corridor outside. But Lin Xiao had expected that too. He'd already spoken to a junior discipline officer the night before: a quiet word, a quiet request: watch the side doors. Watch who leaves when the cloth comes out. The officer had nodded, not understanding why, but trusting the strange, calm boy who'd asked so politely. The corrupt elder thought he'd escaped. He didn't know that every step he took away from that hall was another piece of evidence Lin Xiao would use to hang him with later. One trap closed. Another, larger one, had just sprung open, and the old man was already walking blindly into it. Amid the noise and chaos of Fong Lai's collapse, Lin Xiao felt a gaze he hadn't felt in 60 years. It came from the 3rd row, quiet, steady, warm. Su Wan. The youngest inner disciple. Talented, radiant, and utterly, devastatingly innocent. She was watching him. Not with the pity the others gave him. Not with the scorn he'd grown up hearing behind his back. She looked at him the way someone looks at a person they're genuinely seeing for the first time. And then she smiled. It was small, barely a curve of the lips, but it cracked something open in his chest that he thought had turned to ice centuries ago. Because he knew this face. He knew this smile. He had carried the memory of it across an entire lifetime, from this moment, through decades of warfare, through the agony of ascension, to the instant when this same face appeared above him, twisted with cold ambition, as a blade entered his heart. She hadn't done it yet. Her hands were clean. Her eyes were kind. She was 15 years old, and she had no idea what she would one day become. And that made it infinitely worse. Because the person who would eventually destroy him was smiling at him right now, and she didn't even know what she was. The enforcement elder studied Lin Xiao for a long, silent moment. The hall had emptied. Fong Lai had been dragged out. The verdict was recorded. Only the 2 of them remained, standing in the cold, vast space where a boy's life had nearly been ended, and then, instead, rewritten entirely. The elder spoke 4 words: "You are under my tutelage now." The outer courtyard was behind him. The whispers of "waste," the nickname he'd carried since childhood, the brand that had made him invisible, died in people's throats overnight. He was no longer the discarded son. He was a named disciple of the enforcement elder, with access to resources, training grounds, and authority he'd never been granted in his past life. But that night, alone in a small room he'd never deserved the last time around, Lin Xiao sat cross-legged in the dark. In his palm rested a broken jade pendant, pale green, cracked down the center, its surface worn smooth by years of nervous handling. Su Wan had given it to him in his past life, 2 weeks before his trial. He'd kept it through everything, through the destruction of his veins, through decades of crawling back from nothing, through the long, blood-soaked road to godhood. He'd been holding it the day she killed him. His fist closed around it until the edges cut into his skin. Save her from the monster she'd become. Reach out, guide her, shield her from the choices that would twist her into a betrayer. Or destroy the seed before it had the chance to bloom, before her smile could ever become the mask hiding a knife. He didn't have an answer yet. But he knew one thing with absolute certainty: whatever he chose, it would cost him something he wasn't sure he could afford to lose. Every sect has its Colosseum. The Azure Cloud sect built theirs from white stone quarried from the eastern cliffs, stone that drank blood and never showed it. This morning, that arena was packed. Thousands of disciples, rows of elders, banners snapping in the mountain wind. Lin Xiao walked onto the sand and felt the familiar crunch beneath his boots. Last time, he'd stood on this exact spot at 17, trembling, already defeated before the first punch was thrown. The crowd had laughed then. They were laughing now. A signature disciple, with no clan name, no spiritual root, no future, entered like a lamb led to slaughter. But Lin Xiao wasn't looking at the crowd. He was looking at the bracket board, and behind every name written there, he saw a ghost. This one would betray the sect in 30 years. That one would die screaming in the demonic wars. This one here would knuckle under, live small, and die forgotten. He knew them all. He'd buried most of them. And the ones he hadn't buried, he'd killed himself. The first match was called. Lin Xiao's opponent was a blade user, broad, heavy, aggressive. The boy had a signature spinning slash that had won him 9 consecutive matches. The crowd expected him to open with it. Lin Xiao expected it too. In fact, he was counting on it. Keep Truoc, this boy would survive the inner sect, wander into the demonic battlefield at 23, and die with 3 ribs shattered by a demon lord's hammer. Same ribs. Same fracture point. Lin Xiao had stood over that body too. The blade user launched his spin, exactly as predicted. But Lin Xiao had already moved. 1 step left. 1 palm strike, surgically placed on the rib that would one day break anyway. The boy crumpled. Not dead. Not crippled. But his body remembered the pain, and the fight was over. Lin Xiao turned away without looking back. Total time, 11 seconds. The crowd hadn't even settled into their seats. Second match. A softer fighter, a boy trained in fluid martial arts, feints within feints. His technique was genuinely beautiful. Lin Xiao could admit that. Last time, this boy's elegance had earned him a seat among the elders' favorites. And 20 years later, that same elegance had let him walk into the sect's treasury at midnight and steal every ancient manual they owned. He'd sold them to the demonic courts. 300 techniques, gone in a single night of betrayal. The boy tried his prettiest feint now, a shoulder fake into a low sweep. Flawless execution. Beautiful form. Lin Xiao walked straight through it. Not around. Through. He caught the sweep with his shin, didn't flinch, and flicked 2 fingers into the boy's throat. Gently. Just enough to close the airway for 3 seconds. The boy dropped, gasping, tears streaming. Lin Xiao leaned down. Call it a lesson. Call it prevention. Either way, that theft would never happen now. The third opponent was different. Undefeated. 18 matches, 18 victories. This boy was strong, legitimately, genuinely strong. In another life, he would become a sect elder, respected and honorable. Lin Xiao actually felt a flicker of respect. But respect didn't mean mercy. The boy came in fast, disciplined, no wasted movement. A real martial artist. Lin Xiao let him move. Let him commit. Let him throw his best combination, a 3-strike pattern that would become his signature for decades. Then Lin Xiao simply wasn't there. Not faster. Not flashier. Just, gone. Every punch hit air. Every kick found nothing. The boy's breathing grew ragged. His composure cracked. He swung wider, harder, more desperate. Lin Xiao waited until the boy's footwork broke down, 1 misstep, one open lane, and placed a single finger on his sternum. Push. Not a strike. A push. The boy flew backward and didn't get up. 3 matches. 3 victories. Total time, under 4 minutes. The arena was dead silent. Lin Xiao hadn't used a single advanced technique. He'd simply moved before his opponents moved. As if he could see every attack before it launched. Silence first. Then whispers, spreading through the crowd like cold through water. Who taught him that? That footwork, it's not from any Azure Cloud manual. He moved like someone who'd fought 1,000 battles. They were right to be afraid. They just didn't know how right. On the elder's platform, faces shifted. The enforcement elder watched with careful, measuring eyes, half suspicious, half intrigued. And beside him, the corrupt elder sat perfectly still. Too still. His jaw was tight. His fingers gripped the armrest hard enough to splinter the wood. He'd sent his cousin disciple into this tournament expecting an easy win, expecting Lin Xiao to be eliminated, humiliated, crushed back into irrelevance. Instead, a nobody had just dismantled 3 opponents without breaking sweat. The corrupt elder leaned sideways and whispered something to the boy next to him. The cousin disciple nodded. His eyes locked onto Lin Xiao with killing intent. Lin Xiao felt it. He always felt it. And he smiled. Everything was going exactly as he remembered. Which meant the real trap was right on schedule. The cousin disciple stepped onto the stage like he owned it. Tall, broad-shouldered, fed on spirit pills since childhood, the corrupt elder's prized weapon. He'd been groomed for greatness. And in 60 years, he would achieve a terrible version of it. Lin Xiao's eyes went cold. He could see it so clearly, this smirking boy standing amid the burning ruins of the Azure Cloud eastern peaks. 300 disciples dead in a single night. The halls where children trained, turned into abattoirs. The libraries, the medicine gardens, the ancestral shrines, all ash. Lin Xiao had walked through those ruins on his knees. He remembered the smoke. He remembered the silence afterward, the kind of silence that only exists where living people used to be. And here was the architect of all that suffering, 17 years old, cracking his knuckles, grinning like this was a game. Lin Xiao didn't feel anger. Anger was too small, too human for what he felt. He felt the cold clarity of a man who had already mourned and was now here to unwrite the eulogy. 60 years from now, this boy would become a monster. But today, he was still only human. The cousin disciple was still talking. Trash talk. Posturing. Lin Xiao wasn't listening. He was somewhere else. He was standing in the eastern peaks, 60 years from now, ankle deep in ash that had been people. Children. Friends. The smoke was so thick the sun turned red. He found xian's ribbon in the rubble. Torn. Burned at the edges. Still warm. That was the moment the old Lin Xiao had broken. The moment the sword god was born, not from enlightenment, but from a grief so total it burned everything else away. He'd sworn an oath over those graves, kneeling in ash and blood. An oath that echoed across the cultivation world for decades. But an oath made after the fact is just grief with a weapon. Here, now, standing on this stage at 17, he had something better than an oath. He had timing. He had foreknowledge. And he had this boy, right here, within arm's reach. Still smirking. Still human. The seeds of 300 deaths were growing inside this boy right now. Lin Xiao intended to poison the soil before they bloomed. The cousin disciple charged, full power, no restraint, every ounce of cultivation the corrupt elder had poured into him. It was impressive. For this age, it was genuinely terrifying. Lin Xiao drew the black iron sword. The rusted, ugly blade that every disciple in the sect had mocked. And for one fraction of a second, less than a heartbeat, less than a blink, the air around Lin Xiao changed. Temperature dropped. Wind stopped. Birds went silent in the trees half a mile away. A flash of golden cold light erupted from the rusted edge. It wasn't a technique from any manual. It wasn't a move any elder could name. It was something older, something carved into the marrow of a man who had once stood at the absolute peak of the entire cultivation world. The sword god's shadow, bleeding through the shell of a boy. One strike. The cousin disciple's weapon didn't break, it disintegrated. Shards of steel hung in the air like frozen rain. Then the boy's knees hit the platform. His eyes were wide, not with pain, but with the primal, animal terror of prey staring into the eyes of something that had already killed it 1,000 times. He hadn't been defeated. He'd been unmade. On the elder's platform, every face had frozen. The corrupt elder was standing. When had he stood? He didn't remember standing. His face was the color of ash. His hand was gripping the disciple beside him so hard the boy winced. He'd felt it. For one instant, that golden cold flash had carried an aura that didn't belong to a boy. Didn't belong to this era. It was the kind of pressure that only existed at the very summit of cultivation, the kind that could crush mountains and silence rivers. The corrupt elder had only read about it in ancient texts. He'd never expected to feel it on an inner sect tournament stage. 3 seats away, the enforcement elder sat forward. His eyes were narrow, sharp, locked on Lin Xiao with an intensity that had nothing to do with suspicion. Something closer to awe, quickly suppressed. The enforcement elder had served the Azure Cloud sect for 40 years. He'd watched thousands of disciples fight on this stage. He had never seen anything like what had just happened. The silence stretched. Nobody applauded. Nobody moved. Then, very slowly, Lin Xiao sheathed the black iron sword, stepped off the platform, and walked away as if nothing extraordinary had occurred. And across the arena, a figure in grey robes smiled. The tournament broke for midday. Crowds scattered toward the dining halls, still murmuring, still glancing back at the stage as if expecting the golden flash to replay itself. But Lin Xiao wasn't watching the crowd anymore. His eyes were fixed on the highest row of the spectator stands, where a single figure sat alone, wrapped in faded grey robes, completely still. While everyone else had gasped, shouted, or leaped to their feet during that final strike, this man hadn't moved a muscle. He'd sat there like stone. Like someone who had seen far, far worse and found this merely interesting. Now he stood. Slowly. Deliberately. And without a single word or backward glance, he walked toward the eastern gate and disappeared into the tree line. Lin Xiao's blood went cold. He knew that man. 60 years from now, on a blood-soaked cliff overlooking the shattered heavens, that grey-robed stranger would owe Lin Xiao a life debt, earned in a battle so catastrophic it redrew the borders of 3 continents. But here, now, that battle was decades away. The debt didn't exist yet. Which meant the old man had come to watch for one reason only. Something, or someone, had already caught his attention. And Lin Xiao had a terrible, wonderful, terrifying feeling he knew exactly who. 60 years of memory gave Lin Xiao many gifts, but none more valuable than patience. He knew tonight was the night. The corrupt elder had run out of patience. One loss at the tournament, one failed frame-up at the discipline hall, the old man was terrified, and terrified men did stupid things. In the courtyard below, Fong Lai met a shadow. An assassin. A blade for hire who specialized in silent deaths, broken necks, vanishings, accidents that left no marks. Last time, this exact killer had ambushed Lin Xiao on a mountain road, shattered 3 ribs, severed the tendon in his left arm, and left him bleeding in the mud. It took Lin Xiao 2 months to recover. 2 months of agony, waiting for the tendons to knit. But that was 60 years from now, and in 60 years, this killer never changed his methods. He always entered from the eastern wall. He always struck at the 3rd watch. And he always used the same paralyzing incense. Lin Xiao had prepared for each. Xian didn't understand why Lin Xiao asked her to borrow formation stones from the supply shed. Old Lu didn't understand why Lin Xiao wanted his patrol schedule changed. Neither of them questioned it. Xian, because she trusted him. Old Lu, because the boy had earned it. Together, they'd built 4 layers of defense around Lin Xiao's quarters. Layer 1, an alarm formation at the eastern wall, tuned to the specific weight and footstep pattern of a grown man. Not a disciple. Not an elder. A specific build, a specific gate. Layer 2, a chi disruption grid that would shatter any paralyzing incense the moment it touched the air. Layer 3, a binding array triggered by hostile intent. And Layer 4. Layer 4 was Lin Xiao himself, sitting cross-legged in the dark, eyes open, the black iron sword across his knees, waiting. Last time, this killer had been a ghost. A phantom that no one survived. But even a ghost had patterns. And Lin Xiao had spent 60 years memorizing this ghost's every step. The assassin entered from the eastern wall. Exactly as predicted. He crept along the roof tiles, silent, weightless, a man who'd killed over 100 cultivators and never left a trace. He reached the window. Pulled out the paralyzing incense. Crushed it. And the chi disruption grid activated, the powder dissolved into harmless dust before it crossed the threshold. The assassin's eyes narrowed. He adjusted. Reached for his backup blade instead. His hand crossed the binding array's radius. Golden light erupted. Formation chains wrapped around his wrist, his arm, his chest, locking him in place like an insect in amber. He thrashed, snarled, tried to trigger his escape talisman. It didn't activate. Lin Xiao had sabotaged that, too. 60 years ago, he'd learned this killer carried an emergency escape talisman sewn into the left collar. Last time, it saved the man's life when a target's bodyguard nearly caught him. Lin Xiao stepped from the shadows. The assassin, the phantom who had terrorized the cultivation world for decades, stared up at a 16-year-old boy, bound and defeated before he'd drawn his weapon. Lin Xiao crouched to meet his eyes. Cold. Patient. And utterly unsurprised. Assassins were trained to resist interrogation. Sever their own meridians, bite through their tongues, activate suicide arrays, anything but talk. This one tried. He tried to crush his own chi pathways, trigger a death collapse, the way he'd done once before when the Iron Fist sect had captured him. But Lin Xiao's sword intent, the faint golden thread of sword god level chi that leaked from the black iron sword, had already locked every meridian in the assassin's body shut. The man couldn't even circulate chi, let alone self-destruct. So Lin Xiao used the soul search technique, a crude version, scraped from the broken pages of the xianxia remnant art. It was enough. The assassin's memories unspooled like a scroll, contracts, dead drops, meeting points, paymasters. Years of kills. Names. Faces. Each one a debt Lin Xiao filed away for later. But for now, he needed one thing: who hired this man, here, tonight, in Azure Cloud sect. The payment ledger was hidden in the assassin's inner robe. A folded paper, encrypted in sect shorthand, the kind only insiders used. Lin Xiao broke the cipher in seconds. He'd learned it from Su Wan herself, 60 years later, when she'd carelessly left documents on her desk, trusting that her dead husband couldn't possibly read them anymore. The names were no surprise. The corrupt elder. Fang Lai. A treasurer. 2 outer sect managers. Pawns, expected, traceable, disposable. But at the bottom of the list was a seal. Not the corrupt elders. Not Azure Clouds. Something older. A sigil he recognized, a hidden power that operated above sects, above kingdoms, above the entire cultivation world. And within that sigil, a submark. A lineage crest. The exact emblem that would one day be embroidered on Su Wan's inner robes when she drove the dagger into his back. She wasn't a lone traitor. She was a cultivated asset. Chosen. Groomed. Embedded. Something had been moving pieces on the board long before Lin Xiao realized a game was being played. At dawn, Lin Xiao walked into the enforcement hall. Not running. Not rushing. He carried the assassin's confession, the payment ledger, the formation stones used by the killer, and a memory crystal containing the soul search testimony, everything, laid out on the enforcement elder's desk like a merchant displaying wares. The elder examined each piece. The formation stones carried spiritual fingerprints, unique chi signatures embedded during crafting. The corrupt elder's signature was unmistakable. You could change your face, change your name, but your crafting chi was as personal as your heartbeat. The ledger confirmed payment amounts, dates, routing through 3 intermediaries. And the assassin's own memory crystal showed the handoff, a hooded figure meeting the killer at the sect's eastern gate. The figure's build, posture, and chi color all matched one person. There was no room for denial. No angle for escape. 30 years of brotherhood between the enforcement elder and his colleague, and the proof was absolute. The corrupt elder arrived escorted by 2 disciplined hall guards. He saw the evidence spread across the desk and stopped dead. For one heartbeat, his face went gray, true, bloodless gray, the color of a man watching his grave open beneath him. Then he recovered. Blustered. Pointed at Lin Xiao, called him a crippled waste, a fraud, a plant sown by enemies of the sect. But the evidence answered every accusation before it landed. The crafting signature couldn't be faked. The payment ledger contained the elder's private cipher, a code used only for his most sensitive transactions. And the assassin's memory crystal played the handoff in vivid detail, the corrupt elder's own face visible beneath the hood, his own voice giving the kill order. The enforcement elder watched it all with an expression carved from stone. 30 years, he'd stood beside this man. Trusted him. Defended him in council votes. And for 30 years, the corrupt elder had been running a shadow network inside the sect, selling positions, silencing rivals, and now, ordering the murder of a 16-year-old disciple. The sentence was delivered without ceremony. No trial. No council vote. The evidence was absolute, and the enforcement elder had the authority to act alone in matters of sect murder. The corrupt elder's cultivation was severed on the spot, the enforcement elder's palm strike shattered every meridian in his body with surgical precision. Decades of cultivation, centuries of accumulated power, gone in a single breath. The corrupt elder screamed. Not the dignified rage of a fallen patriarch, the raw, animal howl of a man who had just lost everything he'd spent his entire life building. 2 guards dragged him toward the sect gates. His fingers clawed the stone floor, leaving bloody trails. Lin Xiao watched from the doorway. In his past life, this man had orchestrated the campaign that destroyed Lin Zhao's reputation, turned the sect against him, and funneled him into the dead end where Su Wan's blade waited. He died screaming in a cultivation cave, alone, betrayed by the very people he'd served. That future would never happen now. The first name on Lin Zhao's list was crossed out. And there were many, many more. That night, Lin Xiao sat alone. The sect was quiet. The corrupt elder's screams had faded hours ago, and the corridors were still. He should have felt satisfied. The first enemy was destroyed. The trap had worked flawlessly. He had the black iron sword, 60 years of knowledge, the enforcement elder's backing, and now a list of enemies stretching into the highest levels of the cultivation world. He was ahead of every schedule he'd set for himself. And yet, that seal on the assassin's ledger burned in his mind. A power above sections, a hand that had shaped Su Wan into a weapon long before he ever met her. If they were already watching Azure Cloud, then Lin Xiao wasn't the hunter. He was competing. A letter slid under his door. No footsteps. No spiritual trace. No scent. Just a folded paper, crossing the threshold as if delivered by a ghost. He opened it. And every thought in his mind stopped. The handwriting was his own. Not his 16-year-old hand, the hand that had written his final words at the end of his last life, 60 years from now. The cipher was unbreakable, known to no one but himself. And the message contained 4 words that should not exist, asterisk, you forgot one thing. Asterisk, he thought he was the only one who remembered. He was wrong.